It was a busy afternoon in the city's fanciest shopping mall. Customers buzzed about, admiring displays of designer outfits, glittering jewelry, and high-end accessories. In the midst of this lively scene, a graceful black woman stepped into one of the most exclusive boutiques. Her simple yet elegant style instantly set her apart. She wore a modest but classy dress, her hair wrapped in a beautiful headscarf, and her presence was calm but commanding. She moved through the store with quiet confidence, gently running her fingers over the fabrics, inspecting each item thoughtfully. From behind the counter, the salesman spotted her. His eyes narrowed slightly as he observed her from a distance, barely hiding a skeptical expression. He watched as she picked up a sleek, expensive dress, admiring its smooth fabric and intricate details. With a slight smirk, he approached her, his footsteps light, but his gaze judging. "Looking for something specific?" he asked, a faint edge in his tone that hinted he didn't quite believe she belonged there. She smiled politely, ignoring the tone in his voice, and asked if she could try on the dress. The salesman raised his eyebrows, almost as if in disbelief, but handed her the dress with a dismissive shrug. He didn't say much, but his look spoke volumes, as if he wondered if she could actually afford it. She took the dress and headed towards the fitting room, her back straight, showing no sign that his attitude had affected her. But as soon as she disappeared behind the curtain, he let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head as if to himself. The woman didn't hear him, but something about his dismissive attitude lingered, filling the air with a subtle tension. After a few minutes, the woman emerged from the fitting room, now wearing the elegant dress. It draped beautifully over her shoulders, accentuating her graceful frame. She walked towards one of the large mirrors at the center of the store, studying the fit and admiring the way the fabric caught the light. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet appreciation as she adjusted the dress slightly, smoothing out a wrinkle near her hip. It was clear this dress made her feel special, as if it was crafted just for her. But just as she was beginning to lose herself in the moment, the salesman approached, his impatience all too evident. "You sure about that one?" he asked, the doubt laced in his voice now more obvious. Without waiting for her response, he reached out to adjust the dress himself, tugging a bit too harshly at the fabric near her shoulder. The woman stiffened, taken aback by his unexpected forwardness. Before she could react, there was a sharp, unmistakable sound of fabric tearing. A gasp escaped her lips as she glanced down to see a jagged rip along the seam of the dress. She instinctively reached for the tear, her cheeks flushing with a mix of shock and embarrassment. The dress had been beautiful, perfect even, but now it lay damaged, its delicate fabric undone by the salesman's careless handling. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Yet, instead of apologizing or showing any hint of remorse, the salesman simply shrugged, brushing off the incident as if it were nothing. "These dresses are delicate," he muttered dismissively. "You have to handle them properly. Maybe something more practical would suit you better." The words stung, each one a subtle jab wrapped in thinly veiled condescension. The woman took a slow breath, steadying herself. She could feel her heart pounding, a mix of embarrassment and frustration welling up inside her. The humiliation was almost overwhelming, but she held herself together, her poise unshaken. In a calm, even voice, she looked the salesman squarely in the eyes and said, "I think I'll let my husband handle this." There was no anger in her tone, only a quiet strength that hinted at something the salesman couldn't quite grasp. The salesman raised an eyebrow, unimpressed and unbothered. He chuckled under his breath, a smug smile creeping across his face as he crossed his arms. "Sure, go ahead," he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. To him, the mention of a husband seemed like an empty threat, nothing to take seriously. He saw her as just another customer, a minor inconvenience, someone who, in his eyes, could easily be dismissed. But as the woman walked away, there was a hint of something in her eyes, a calm assurance that suggested she wasn't just anyone. And as she took out her phone, his mocking smile began to falter, though he quickly pushed the thought aside, confident he had nothing to worry about. The woman stepped aside, pulling out her phone with a calm, practiced motion. Her fingers moved with purpose as she dialed a number, her expression cool and composed, as though nothing unusual had happened. Her voice was low and steady, barely above a whisper, yet her tone conveyed an unspoken assurance. "Hi, love," she began, her voice soft, yet unmistakably clear. "There's been a bit of an incident at the store. Do you mind stopping by?" As she ended the call, a subtle smile played at the corners of her mouth, a small sign of the confidence that had never wavered despite the salesman's dismissive behavior. She returned to the mirror, standing tall, her hand still resting lightly on the torn fabric. There was no hint of anxiety or distress, only a quiet sense of anticipation. Meanwhile, the salesman continued to watch her, his expression shifting between irritation and mild curiosity. He had overheard part of her conversation, though he dismissed it as unimportant. In his mind, this was just another minor inconvenience, a momentary annoyance he would soon forget. He turned his attention back to folding clothes on a nearby rack, his mind drifting elsewhere. A few minutes passed, and the hum of the store continued as usual, customers browsing, sales associates chatting politely with patrons. The woman remained by the mirror, her gaze calm and unwavering, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly, the glass doors at the front of the store slid open. A tall, well-dressed man entered, his stride confident and purposeful. Heads turned as he made his way through the aisles, his presence demanding attention without a single word. His suit was impeccable, tailored perfectly to fit his strong frame, and his expression held an intensity that was hard to ignore. The salesman looked up, his initial annoyance quickly fading as he took in the man's appearance. There was something familiar about him, something that seemed to strike a faint, uneasy chord in the back of his mind. But he couldn't quite place it. As the man's gaze swept across the store and landed on the woman by the mirror, his face softened, a slight smile forming as he approached her. The salesman watched, frozen in place, a slight knot beginning to form in his stomach. It was then, in that brief, silent exchange between the man and the woman, that the salesman realized he might have underestimated her, and that the simple phone call she had made was far from meaningless. The woman's face softened as her husband approached, his steady gaze meeting hers with an unspoken understanding. He stopped in front of her, his eyes briefly assessing the torn dress, his brows knitting in quiet disapproval. Without a word, he reached out and gently adjusted the torn fabric on her shoulder, his touch both protective and tender. For a moment, they simply stood there, exchanging a look that spoke volumes. Anyone watching could sense the strength of their connection, the quiet power that bound them together. The salesman, however, remained oblivious to the depth of their bond. He observed the interaction from a distance, now growing slightly uncomfortable as he noticed the man's calm authority. His fingers fidgeted nervously at the edge of the counter, his once smug demeanor beginning to waver. But still, he convinced himself that this was just an ordinary couple. Surely, he thought, they were just another pair of customers who might complain to a manager, nothing more. He cleared his throat, hoping to regain some of his earlier confidence. The husband turned his attention to the salesman, his expression shifting to one of polite but unmistakable scrutiny. He took a single step forward, closing the distance between them. The salesman swallowed, suddenly feeling the weight of the man's presence, a presence that was calm, yet undeniably powerful, as though every gesture was carefully measured. For the first time, a trace of worry flickered across the salesman's face, though he attempted to mask it with a forced professional smile. "Good afternoon," the husband said, his voice smooth and steady, but with an undertone that demanded respect. He extended his hand, introducing himself formally, his grip firm yet courteous. The salesman accepted the handshake, surprised by its strength and the unspoken authority it conveyed. There was no hint of aggression, only an unyielding confidence that unsettled him further. "I understand there was an issue with my wife's dress," the husband continued, his tone neutral yet firm. His gaze held steady on the salesman, unwavering, as though he could see straight through any facade. The salesman attempted to compose himself, glancing nervously between the husband and the torn dress. "Ah, yes, sir," he stammered, his voice lacking the smugness it had held earlier. "It was, a misunderstanding, you see. I was merely assisting her and, well, these things happen." The husband raised an eyebrow, his expression cool and unamused. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, each syllable carrying a subtle weight that seemed to fill the room. "Because from what I understand, you mishandled the item in question, causing the damage." His voice was calm, but carried an edge that left no room for excuses. The salesman's face paled slightly, the thin veneer of his professionalism beginning to crack. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause any harm," the salesman quickly replied, his voice trembling slightly. "These dresses, they're delicate, you know." Sometimes customers don't realize that, and accidents happen. He offered a strained smile, hoping his words would diffuse the situation, but the husband's gaze remained steady, his silence speaking louder than words, allowing the weight of the salesman's excuses to hang in the air. Finally, the husband tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the salesman's face. "You seem to misunderstand," he said slowly, enunciating each word with quiet precision. "My wife is quite familiar with fine clothing and is fully aware of how to handle it. The issue here isn't the dress, it's how you chose to handle her." His words were a measured reprimand, each syllable landing with a quiet authority that left the salesman momentarily speechless. A tense silence filled the space between them. The salesman's forced smile now completely gone, he stood frozen, grappling for a response, as the gravity of the husband's words began to sink in. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on the salesman as he struggled to regain his composure. He attempted a weak chuckle, glancing away in an effort to lighten the tension, but the husband's steady gaze didn't waver. The man's calmness was disarming, and the salesman felt an unsettling sense of exposure, as though his every flaw was being laid bare. He forced himself to look back at the couple, his mind racing to find the right words to save face. "Sir, I apologize if there was any misunderstanding," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. The usual confidence he used to brush off complaints was gone, replaced by an edge of desperation. "I was only trying to help, and sometimes, customers come in without fully understanding the quality of these garments. I didn't mean to be disrespectful." He laughed nervously, hoping to pass it off as a simple lapse in professionalism. The husband didn't react, his face a calm mask of patience as he listened to the salesman's stumbling explanation. Beside him, his wife watched quietly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a quiet strength that suggested she had no intention of excusing the treatment she had endured. The husband finally took a slow breath, exhaling with a controlled calm that hinted at the restraint he was exercising. "I appreciate that accidents happen," he said, his voice level and clear. "However, respect is not an accident. It's something one either has or lacks, wouldn't you agree?" His tone was gentle, almost conversational, yet there was no mistaking the firmness behind it. The question lingered in the air, and the salesman felt its weight settle heavily on his shoulders. He swallowed hard, the realization dawning on him that this man was not someone he could simply dismiss. This wasn't a fleeting complaint or a minor annoyance. The husband's calm authority left no room for argument, and the salesman could feel his defenses crumbling under the weight of his own words. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling exposed in a way that he had never experienced in his career. Trying one last time to regain control, the salesman forced a smile and offered a hasty response. "Yes, of course, sir. Respect is very important. I didn't mean to come across as disrespectful. I understand now that I may have acted inappropriately." His voice was barely steady, each word more desperate than the last, as though he were grasping at straws to salvage his pride. The husband watched him in silence for a moment longer, then nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your acknowledgement," he said, his voice softer now, almost as if he were giving the salesman a final chance to understand the true depth of his misstep. "But please, understand this, the way you treat people matters. My wife deserves respect, not only because of who she is, but because every person who steps into this store should receive that basic decency." The husband's words hung in the air, his tone striking a delicate balance between compassion and firmness. The salesman could feel a flush creeping up his neck, a prickling embarrassment that was impossible to hide. His gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet the steady gaze of the man before him. For the first time, he felt truly humbled, confronted not by anger or outrage, but by an unwavering sense of dignity and respect that demanded nothing less in return. The woman, who had stood silently beside her husband, finally spoke, her voice as gentle as it was strong. "Thank you for listening," she said, addressing the salesman with a quiet grace that left him feeling even smaller. "We don't need an apology, just a little more understanding." Her words were kind, yet they cut through him with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. She wasn't asking for sympathy or special treatment. She was simply asserting the respect she rightfully deserved. The salesman nodded, his face a mix of shame and reluctant acceptance. He stammered out a final, quiet apology, his voice barely audible. As he looked up, he could see the couple standing together, their unity and strength apparent in the way they looked at one another. It was clear that this was no ordinary couple, and he knew deep down that he would never forget this encounter. As the husband turned to his wife, offering her his arm with a gentle smile, the couple moved towards the door, leaving the salesman in a silence that was both humbling and profound. For the first time, he was left with the uncomfortable realization that respect was something that had to be earned and given freely, a lesson that, though painful, was perhaps the most valuable he'd ever received. As the couple moved gracefully towards the exit, their presence leaving a noticeable stillness in the store, the salesman remained rooted to his spot. He watched them, feeling the weight of everything that had transpired. A quiet dread crept over him, mixing uneasily with a newfound respect. He had spent years in this job, confidently assuming he knew his customers and how to handle them. But today, he realized he had been blindsided, not by force, but by dignity. Just before they reached the door, the store manager, a sharp-eyed woman with a warm but commanding presence, entered from a back office. She glanced at the couple, immediately sensing something unusual. The salesman's face paled as she approached, her eyes shifting between him and the couple, noticing the torn dress and the strained look on his face. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice kind but firm. The woman and her husband paused, exchanging a brief look before the man nodded, his expression calm as he turned to the manager. "We had a minor incident," he said, his voice gentle, yet still carrying that unmistakable authority. "There was a misunderstanding with your staff, but it's been addressed." His words were diplomatic, but there was no mistaking the undertone. They had been gracious in forgiving, yet the impression left was indelible. The manager's gaze shifted to the salesman, narrowing as she read the discomfort on his face. She knew him to be competent, but perhaps a bit too sure of himself, sometimes allowing his judgments to cloud his customer interactions. The truth dawned on her, and she let out a small sigh, as if recognizing the limits of her trust in him. "Thank you for letting me know," she replied to the man, maintaining her professional tone. "I'm deeply sorry if there was any disrespect. It's not how we conduct ourselves here." The woman gave a gentle smile, nodding with a quiet understanding. "We appreciate your response," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that surprised even the manager. "It's all we ask for, just a bit of respect." She reached out, lightly touching her husband's arm, signaling they were ready to leave. But just as they took their final step towards the door, the manager turned to the salesman, her expression shifting from warmth to a controlled sternness. "Let's have a word in my office," she said, her voice firm. The salesman's shoulders sagged as he nodded, casting one last look towards the couple. He felt a pang of regret, not just for the consequences he now faced, but for having failed to treat them with the simple decency they had every right to expect. As the couple exited, the woman glanced back once, her gaze soft but unreadable, as if offering a silent message that left the salesman with one final, unforgettable reminder: respect wasn't a privilege to be given at whim. It was an expectation, a foundation of every human interaction, a truth that, from this day on, he could never ignore. The couple walked through the grand mall corridors, their steps in sync, their presence still exuding a quiet confidence. The husband looked down at his wife, giving her a reassuring smile that seemed to ease the lingering tension from their recent encounter. She returned his smile, a gentle warmth in her eyes, grateful for his unwavering support. Their silent communication spoke volumes. No words were needed between them to convey the depth of their mutual respect and understanding. As they strolled, they passed by shop windows displaying glittering jewelry, elegant suits, and luxurious perfumes. Other shoppers, noticing their grace and poise, glanced at them with a mix of admiration and curiosity. There was something about the couple that commanded respect, a natural aura that drew people's attention without any effort on their part. The woman remained poised, her head held high, radiating a calm strength that made even strangers pause and take notice. They stopped at a nearby cafe, and the husband gestured towards a cozy table by the window. As they settled in, the sunlight streaming through the glass cast a warm glow on their faces, illuminating the contentment in their expressions. The husband reached for her hand, gently holding it as they sat in comfortable silence. After a moment, he spoke, his voice soft yet filled with admiration. "You handled that with so much grace," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a look of genuine respect. "I know how difficult it must have been to stay calm in the face of such disrespect." He squeezed her hand lightly, his expression conveying both pride and gratitude. She smiled, giving a small shrug, as if to brush off the discomfort of the situation they had just left behind. "It's not the first time," she replied, her tone carrying a hint of sadness mixed with resilience. "But it never gets any easier. People look at us, and sometimes they don't see us for who we are. They only see what they want to see." Her words lingered, a quiet acknowledgement of the challenges they had faced as a couple, the judgments and prejudices they had learned to navigate together. The husband listened, his gaze never wavering, offering her the support she knew would always be there. "They may not see who you are," he said softly, his tone full of reassurance, "but I do. And that's what matters." His words, simple yet profound, brought a faint tear to her eye, which she quickly brushed away, her smile returning as she squeezed his hand in gratitude. For a while they sat there, lost in each other's presence, their connection growing even stronger in the quiet aftermath of their recent experience. The world outside continued on, the hustle and bustle of the mall a distant hum, but within the calm of the cafe, they found a moment of peace. The disrespect they had faced didn't define them. It didn't hold any power over the bond they shared, the resilience they had cultivated, or the love that carried them through every moment, good or bad. As they prepared to leave, they both felt a renewed strength, an unspoken promise to continue facing whatever came their way with dignity and respect. They rose from their seats and with one last gentle smile shared between them, they stepped back out into the world, ready to face it together. As they stepped back into the busy mall, the subtle buzz of life around them filled the air. Shoppers moved in every direction, some absorbed in their own worlds, others briefly glancing at the couple, sensing their quiet grace. The woman's hand remained loosely held in her husband's, a touch that communicated both reassurance and unity. As they strolled side by side, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of gratitude, not only for his support today, but for the unshakable bond they had built over the years. They walked in a comfortable silence, each lost in thought. For the woman, moments from her past began to surface, small, everyday instances of subtle judgments and unspoken prejudices she had learned to brush off. From being overlooked in line to receiving suspicious glances in upscale settings, she had learned to navigate these encounters with composure, knowing they didn't define her. Today, though, the situation had felt different. The salesman's blatant disrespect had cut deeper than usual, catching her off guard. But her husband's presence had, as always, been a steady anchor, reminding her of the resilience she carried within. She stole a glance at him, her heart swelling with affection as she noticed the slight furrow of concentration in his brow. He looked thoughtful, as though weighing something important in his mind. The years had given her an almost instinctive understanding of his moods, his unspoken thoughts, and she could sense he was still turning over the events of the day in his head. She knew him well enough to recognize the quiet frustration he must have felt, watching her treated with such disregard, yet restraining himself to let her handle it in her own way. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice calm, but laced with a heaviness that spoke of the gravity he attached to what had happened. "I just keep thinking about how often you've had to face this," he said, his gaze turning towards her. "It's something I'll never truly understand, but it angers me that you have to carry this burden." She smiled softly, her eyes warm yet tinged with sadness. "I know," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not fair, but it's the reality we live in. I've learned to manage it, and most of the time I can let it go. But there are days like today when it just feels harder." Her words held a quiet acceptance, but also a vulnerability she rarely shared. It was a truth she only ever voiced to him, knowing he was the one person who would hold that truth with care and without judgment. He stopped walking, gently tugging her hand to pause beside him. Turning to face her, he looked deep into her eyes, his expression filled with a fierce, protective love. "You don't have to handle it alone," he said softly, his voice filled with determination. "I'll stand by you, no matter how many times we have to face this. You've been so strong, so graceful through it all. But just remember, I'm here to carry any part of this burden that you'll let me." Her heart warmed at his words, his unwavering commitment, a reminder of the strength their relationship brought to her life. It wasn't that she couldn't face the world alone. She had done so countless times, standing tall in the face of adversity. But his presence, his understanding, gave her a sanctuary where she could be vulnerable, where she didn't have to shoulder everything by herself. It was a gift she never took for granted. They resumed walking, the unspoken promises of love and support filling the space between them. As they passed a quiet corner of the mall, a small, cheerful display caught her eye. A children's bookstore, its window filled with colorful storybooks and playful figurines. Her eyes lingered on the display, and a soft smile curved her lips as she thought of the future they were building together. Perhaps one day they would walk through these same corridors with little hands clinging to theirs, sharing with the next generation the values of respect, strength, and kindness. Her husband noticed her gaze, following her line of sight to the bookstore. Understanding flashed in his eyes, and he gently squeezed her hand, sharing the quiet joy in her expression. "One day," he murmured, his voice filled with hope and a touch of excitement. "One day, we'll create a world for them where they know their worth from the start. They'll see how their mother stands tall, how she's treated with respect, and they'll know they deserve nothing less." His words settled into her heart, filling her with a deep sense of peace and purpose. Together, they would face whatever came, not just for themselves, but for the family they envisioned. They would teach their children to stand tall, to recognize their own worth, to demand respect with the quiet strength that only came from deep self-assurance. And in that moment, with the world bustling around them, they felt a shared sense of clarity, a vision of the life they would continue building, grounded in love, unity, and resilience. They walked on, the future spreading out before them like an open path, filled with possibility and the promise of something beautiful. The challenges they had faced only strengthened their resolve to create a life built on respect and understanding, not only for themselves, but for everyone who would follow in their footsteps. With each step, they left behind the hurt of the day, carrying forward only the lessons and the love that would guide them toward whatever came next. As they strolled through the mall, leaving the incident further and further behind, they found themselves weaving naturally through the crowd, their movements synchronized without a single word exchanged. They were no longer just navigating the space. They were finding their way back to a shared calmness, a state of being that only they understood. The mall, once filled with buzzing activity and sharp judgmental glances, felt less intimidating now, softened by their mutual presence. Each passerby blurred into the background, the whispers of casual conversations and echoing footsteps fading into a comfortable hum. The woman's thoughts drifted to how easily people made assumptions, casting silent judgments without knowing a single truth about someone's life. She had often wondered what others saw when they looked at her and her husband. Perhaps a well-dressed couple, perhaps a man and a woman who didn't fit into their narrow preconceptions of class or worth. She had learned over the years that dignity didn't always need to be proven outwardly. But still, there were days, moments like today, when the unspoken judgments seemed to cut sharper than any words. Her husband seemed to sense the lingering thoughts that weighed on her, his intuition finely tuned to her unspoken reflections. They had built a life on quiet resilience, finding strength not in grand gestures, but in the everyday acts of solidarity they offered one another. He had never tried to take away the reality she faced. Instead, he became her steadfast partner, standing beside her in every challenge, always ready to help bear the burden. He gently nudged her shoulder, his expression softening as he caught her gaze. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "every time I see people like that salesman, I'm reminded of how little they truly understand. They don't see the full picture, not just of us, but of anyone they judge so easily. It's their loss, really, to miss out on knowing the amazing person standing right in front of them." His words lingered between them, an echo of the admiration he felt for her. She smiled, feeling a warmth spread across her chest, his words melting away the remnants of frustration from earlier. She realized that to him, her value had always been a given, something unquestionable and constant. And in moments like this, she felt that truth become her armor, wrapping around her, reminding her that the respect they shared couldn't be diminished by anyone's judgment or carelessness. They turned a corner, reaching a quieter area of the mall, where a row of comfortable benches overlooked a large indoor garden. The greenery spread out before them, lush and calming, with soft lights casting a peaceful glow over the leaves and flowers. Without saying a word, they settled onto one of the benches, taking a moment to rest and reflect. Around them, people walked by, a gentle stream of movement that felt distant and unimportant. The woman leaned into her husband, resting her head on his shoulder. The tranquility of the garden eased her thoughts, allowing her to let go of the tension that had lingered since the encounter. She felt his hand come to rest on hers, his thumb tracing a gentle, soothing pattern across her skin. In his touch, she found a quiet reassurance, an unspoken promise that no matter what happened, they would always have this. A space of calm and acceptance where they could simply be themselves, without judgment or pretense. After a few moments, he turned to her, his voice low and filled with a gentle curiosity. "What keeps you going?" he asked softly, his tone both respectful and genuinely interested. "I mean, with everything you face. I know you handle it with so much grace, but I can see that it takes something from you each time. What gives you the strength to keep showing up, to stay so composed?" She considered his question, feeling the weight of it settle into her mind. It was something she hadn't articulated in a long time, a truth she had often felt, but rarely spoken aloud. She took a deep breath, finding the words as she looked out at the greenery before them. "It's you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if sharing a sacred truth. "And it's us. Knowing that I have this, that we have each other, it makes everything else seem smaller. I can't control how people see me, but I can control how I respond. And with you by my side, I feel like I can handle anything." Her words, simple yet profound, seemed to resonate in the quiet space between them. He nodded, his eyes warm and understanding, his expression one of quiet pride. She felt a deep sense of relief, realizing that the love they shared was not just a refuge, but also a source of strength that had carried her through countless challenges. It wasn't just their shared experiences, but their shared resilience, a bond that couldn't be shaken by the opinions of strangers. In that moment, they both felt an unspoken certainty that whatever they encountered in the world beyond, they would face it together, fortified by a love that understood, accepted, and empowered. They sat in silence, watching the soft play of light across the leaves, feeling as if they were surrounded not by the busy mall, but by a sanctuary built just for them. And for a brief, precious moment, they were no longer a couple in a public space. They were simply two souls, entwined, unbreakable, and deeply, endlessly cherished. They sat there for a long while, enveloped in a tranquility that felt like a balm after the day's earlier tension. The indoor garden, with its vibrant greens and soft dappled light, became their quiet retreat, offering them a peaceful pause from the bustle just outside. Around them, other mall-goers continued about their lives, unaware of the emotional weight that had been lifted from the couple, unaware of the silent strength that radiated between them. In this small, unassuming corner of the mall, the woman felt as though they were in a world of their own. As they sat in silence, memories began to drift through her mind, gentle, yet vivid. She remembered other moments they had faced together, each one a testament to the quiet resilience they had both nurtured over the years. She thought of times when strangers had questioned their choices, their worth, even their right to certain spaces. She remembered how, even in the most trying situations, her husband's steady presence had been her rock, his unwavering support, a reminder that she never stood alone. He had taught her, not through words but through countless small acts, that strength could be found in compassion and patience just as much as in confrontation. As these memories washed over her, she glanced up at him, noticing the soft expression on his face, as he, too, seemed lost in thought. She wondered if he was thinking of the same moments, recalling the same memories that had shaped their journey together. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, a silent acknowledgement of all they had shared and all they had overcome. His hand tightened around hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm, a gesture that had long become a silent language of comfort between them. Finally, breaking the silence, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of his feelings. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "every moment like this reminds me of why we're so much stronger together. The world outside can be harsh, but in here—" He tapped his chest lightly, gesturing towards his heart. "In here, we've built something they can't touch. No one can take this from us." His words stirred something deep within her, a feeling both grounding and uplifting. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Together they had created a life grounded in values that went beyond the world's judgments. It was a life built on mutual respect, patience, and a fierce love that had weathered countless storms. And in those moments, they felt as though they carried with them a small, unbreakable piece of sanctuary wherever they went. She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes as she allowed herself to soak in the warmth of his presence. "I feel the same way," she murmured, her voice softened by emotion. "No matter what happens out there, I know we'll be okay. What we have, it's all that matters." Her words held a conviction that came from a deep, enduring trust, one that had only grown stronger with each challenge they faced. They stayed like that, wrapped in the comfort of each other's presence, until the hustle and bustle around them seemed like a distant hum. It was as if the world had faded away, leaving only the quiet rhythm of their shared breath, the steady beat of their hearts in sync, grounding them in this moment of connection. After a while, they both knew it was time to move on, to rejoin the world outside. But as they rose from the bench, their fingers still intertwined, there was a renewed sense of peace between them. They didn't need to say anything. They simply understood that they were ready, fortified by the love that had become their armor, their refuge, and their strength. They stepped out of the garden area side by side, knowing that whatever they faced, they would face it together, carrying forward the quiet resilience they had built in moments just like these. As they walked, their pace unhurried, their shoulders relaxed. They looked ahead, prepared for whatever awaited them, their bond an unbreakable promise to each other that no judgment, no fleeting encounter, could ever diminish. As they re-entered the bustling heart of the mall, the sounds and sights that had once felt overwhelming now seemed softened, as though a gentle filter had been placed over everything. The couple moved through the crowd with a calm that set them apart, an inner peace radiating from them that subtly turned heads and caught glances. But they barely noticed. For them, each step was no longer burdened by the lingering sting of the salesman's disrespect. Instead, each stride forward felt like a quiet reclaiming of space, a reaffirmation of their place in the world, regardless of anyone else's judgments. The woman's mind drifted as they walked. Her thoughts wandered to the life they had envisioned together, the dreams they shared, and the plans they had woven over quiet conversations late at night. She thought about the values they held close, the ones they would someday pass on, creating a legacy built not just on success, but on kindness, dignity, and respect. The life they had begun to build wasn't only for them, but for those who would one day come after, learning by example from their parents' quiet strength and unity. Her husband sensed her thoughtful silence, and as they passed by a large, curved fountain, he slowed, gently guiding her to pause beside it. The water cascaded in soft streams, shimmering under the light, casting playful reflections across their faces. It was a serene spot, a small island of calm in the mall's lively ocean of activity. They stood together, watching the water ripple and flow, lost for a moment in its rhythmic movement. It reminded them both, perhaps unconsciously, of life's natural ebbs and flows, the moments of peace that balanced the moments of hardship. He looked down at her, a question dancing in his eyes. "Do you ever think about where we're going?" he asked softly, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and gentle anticipation. It was a question he had asked her many times before, a familiar refrain that hinted at the dreams they carried together. But today, in light of all they had experienced, it felt like the question held an added weight, as if he were asking not just about their future plans, but about their journey as a whole. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the light of the fountain, a quiet fire of determination within them. "I do," she replied, her voice steady. "I think about it every day, about the life we're building, about making a space where respect is automatic, where we're valued for who we are. And I think about the little ones we'll bring into this world one day, about how we'll teach them to stand tall, to demand respect without ever losing their kindness." Her words were soft, but they carried the strength of someone who had spent years nurturing a vision, someone who knew the power of perseverance. He nodded, a warmth spreading across his face as he absorbed her words. "That's what I want too," he said, his voice filled with an unspoken promise. "I want to be the kind of man they look up to, the kind of father who shows them that strength doesn't have to be loud, that it can be found in compassion, in integrity, in treating others the way they deserve to be treated." His gaze was unwavering, filled with a sincerity that only deepened her respect for him. They stood there, immersed in a shared vision of the future, a future that they were slowly but surely shaping with each choice, each act of resilience, each moment of quiet strength. They could see it so clearly, a home filled with laughter and understanding, a life where they would pass on the values that had carried them through the challenges of their own journey. The fountain's gentle murmur seemed to echo their thoughts, its rhythmic flow an unspoken reassurance that life, like water, would continue to move forward, adapting, finding new paths, always flowing towards something greater. The woman felt a deep sense of peace wash over her, as if the universe itself were aligning with their intentions, silently encouraging them to keep moving forward with trust and conviction. As they turned to continue their walk, their fingers intertwined once more. They both felt as if the weight of the world had grown a little lighter. The mall around them was no longer just a place filled with strangers and judgments. It was a place where they belonged, where they had chosen to exist with dignity and grace, carving out a space for themselves in a world that sometimes failed to see their worth. They walked on, their path illuminated not by the lights of the mall, but by the quiet glow of their shared purpose. Each step was an affirmation, a testament to the strength they had cultivated together, and with each stride, they were reminded that no single encounter, no fleeting disrespect, could ever diminish the life they were creating, a life grounded in respect, love, and the quiet, unyielding belief that they deserved to be here just as they were. As they continued through the mall, the familiar rhythms of everyday life flowed around them, yet everything felt subtly transformed. The couple moved in sync, still wrapped in the quiet serenity they had found beside the fountain. With each step, they both felt as though they were stepping into a new chapter of their shared story, one woven with resilience, mutual respect, and a vision of the future that stretched ahead with a certain clarity and purpose. Passing by a row of stores, they noticed a small boutique with delicate, handcrafted items on display. The woman's eyes caught on a beautiful, intricately carved bracelet lying in a glass case, its polished wood adorned with elegant patterns that seemed to tell a story of their own. Drawn to its simplicity and understated beauty, she gently tugged her husband's hand, gesturing towards the store. He smiled, understanding the unspoken request, and together they walked inside. The boutique was quiet, filled with the warm scent of sandalwood and soft ambient music that wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Every piece in the shop was unique, crafted with care and attention to detail. The woman felt an immediate connection to the bracelet, sensing a kind of kinship with its understated elegance and quiet strength. She picked it up, admiring the smooth, polished surface and the intricate carvings, feeling as though it mirrored something within her, a quiet resilience, a beauty born from patience and intention. Her husband watched her, his gaze softening as he observed the way she carefully handled the bracelet, studying its every curve and detail. He understood what this moment meant to her. She wasn't merely admiring an accessory. She was connecting with something that resonated with her on a deeper level, something that represented the values they both cherished. Without a word, he took the bracelet from her hands and brought it to the counter, nodding at the shopkeeper, who smiled warmly and wrapped it in a delicate silk-lined box. As they left the store, the woman opened the box, slipping the bracelet onto her wrist. She admired how it rested there, a reminder of the strength and beauty she carried within herself, one that didn't need validation from anyone else. Her husband reached for her hand again, his thumb gently grazing the bracelet, as if acknowledging the significance it held for her. They continued to walk, her fingers brushing the bracelet, feeling its comforting weight on her wrist. It was a simple reminder of the power of quiet strength, of resilience that didn't need to announce itself loudly. It was a symbol of the life they had chosen to build, one marked not by grand gestures, but by the small, intentional moments that defined their love and commitment. They made their way towards the exit, the mall's bright lights fading behind them as they stepped into the open air. The sky had softened into hues of pink and orange, casting a warm glow over everything, as if nature itself were reflecting the peace they felt within. The cool evening breeze brushed over them, filling their lungs with a fresh sense of renewal. Standing together under the wide open sky, they felt a profound sense of freedom, as though the world had expanded just for them. They both knew that life would continue to challenge them, that there would be more encounters like the one they had faced today, more moments that would test their patience and resilience. But in this moment, all of that felt small, almost insignificant. They had each other, and that was enough. Turning to face her, the husband took her hand in both of his gaze steady and filled with a warmth that went beyond words. "This," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he felt, "is what I want us to remember. No matter what happens, no matter what the world throws at us, we'll always have this, a strength that's ours alone, a peace that no one can take from us." The woman smiled, her eyes shimmering with a quiet joy. She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into her heart, grounding her in the certainty of their bond. Together, they stood there, the sky above and the earth beneath, feeling a sense of wholeness that neither of them had to explain or define. They simply knew. With a final, gentle squeeze of each other's hands, they turned and began to walk home, carrying with them the quiet strength of their shared journey, a journey that would continue to unfold with every step they took together. The future awaited, vast and uncharted, but they faced it with an unbreakable unity, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with love, respect, and the steady, resilient spirit they had forged together. As they left the mall behind, the familiar sights of the city unfolded before them. The soft glow of streetlights lining the sidewalks, small shops and cafes closing for the evening, and couples and families meandering in the gentle twilight. The air was cool and carried with it the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, mingling with the earthy scent of the city after sunset. They walked slowly, neither in a hurry to reach their destination, simply enjoying the easy, comforting silence that had settled between them. The woman glanced at her bracelet, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the intricate carvings. Each groove and line felt purposeful, as though the craftsmen had poured their soul into the wood, leaving a piece of themselves within its design. She felt a sense of kinship with this small, delicate piece. It was resilient, yet graceful, a reminder that beauty and strength could exist quietly, without fanfare. She thought of how their love was much the same, steadfast, enduring, and deeply rooted, needing no grand gestures to prove itself. Noticing her thoughtful gaze, her husband leaned in, curiosity shining in his eyes. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, his voice soft but filled with genuine interest. She looked up at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I was just thinking about how things like this bracelet, things that are crafted with care and intention, carry a kind of strength in their simplicity," she said, her tone contemplative. "It reminds me of us, of everything we've built together. We're not flashy, we're not out there making bold statements, but we're strong, and sometimes that's all that really matters." He nodded, absorbing her words, his expression growing thoughtful. "It's true," he agreed, his voice rich with emotion. "We don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. We've carved out our own path quietly and intentionally, and that's something no one can take from us." His gaze drifted to the city skyline, watching as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the buildings, casting long, soft shadows across the streets. "I think there's a kind of power in that, in knowing who we are and what we stand for, even if the world doesn't always see it." The woman felt a warmth blossom in her chest, a mix of pride and gratitude that she shared this life with someone who understood her so deeply. She thought back to their early days, the initial hurdles they had faced together, the way they had gradually learned to navigate life's challenges as a team. They hadn't always had the answers, but together they had forged a path that felt true to them, a journey that had shaped them into the people they were today. As they continued down the street, they passed by a small park, its benches scattered with people winding down from the day. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering softly in the twilight. The couple paused, drawn by the tranquil beauty of the scene, and made their way to a bench beneath an old oak tree, its branches stretching overhead like a protective canopy. The quiet of the park felt like a natural extension of the peace they had cultivated within themselves. They sat together, the city lights flickering softly in the distance, casting a warm glow over their surroundings. The woman leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breath, grounding her in the present moment. They didn't need to speak. Their shared silence was enough, each heartbeat in sync with the others. After a few moments, he broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "You know, I think one of the greatest things we've done is learn to trust this silence. There's a kind of honesty here, in just being, without needing to explain or defend ourselves." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate within her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice soft. "There's peace in knowing that we're enough, just as we are. We don't need to perform or meet anyone's expectations." Her words felt liberating, like a gentle release of all the pressures they had both carried over the years. They watched as the stars slowly began to emerge, tiny pinpricks of light dotting the darkening sky. It reminded them of the vastness of the world beyond, the countless lives and stories playing out, each one unique and significant. Yet here they were, in this quiet park beneath an ancient tree, a single couple sharing a moment of profound stillness. A reminder that in this vast universe, their love, too, was a small but meaningful piece of a much larger tapestry. Eventually they rose, taking one last lingering look at the park before turning back towards home. The evening air felt cool against their skin, wrapping around them like a gentle reminder of the calm they carried within. Hand in hand, they walked into the night, leaving behind not only the mall, but also the residue of judgment and misunderstanding they had encountered earlier. With every step, they felt lighter, as though they were shedding layers of unspoken burdens, embracing the freedom that came from being truly seen, truly understood. And as they walked, they both felt a quiet certainty settling into their hearts, a knowledge that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, fortified by the strength of a love that needed no words, only presence, only intention. The city lights glowed softly around them, casting long shadows and warm light onto the path before them. And though the night was deepening, they felt as though they carried a piece of sunlight within them, a warmth that would guide them forward, steady and unshakable, lighting their way toward whatever waited on the horizon. As they continued their walk home, the quiet of the evening deepened, and the city took on a serene calmness, with only the occasional car passing by and a gentle murmur from a distant cafe where late-night diners gathered. Their pace slowed, both of them savoring the tranquility of the night and the closeness they felt in each other's presence. The world seemed to fade around them, and for this moment, it felt as if they were the only two souls under the vast expanse of sky, wrapped in a cocoon of trust and peace. They turned onto a narrow street lined with cozy townhouses, each one unique, its own story hinted at through flower boxes, warm porch lights, or the glow of lamps spilling through front windows. As they walked, the woman's gaze drifted from house to house, her mind wandering to dreams of their own future home. She pictured a place filled with laughter and warmth, walls lined with memories, and the sounds of life filling every corner. She could almost see it, the framed photographs of family and friends, the little trinkets collected from places they'd visited together, the bookshelves filled with stories they loved, and the quiet corners where they'd share their thoughts at the end of each day. Her husband seemed to sense her daydream, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze, pulling her attention back to him. "You're imagining our future again, aren't you?" he asked, his tone warm and teasing. She laughed softly, nodding as she looked up at him, her eyes alight with the spark of her dreams. "Yes," she admitted, her voice carrying the faintest hint of excitement. "I can see it so clearly, a home filled with love, with stories and memories we'll create together." She paused, a smile spreading across her face as she imagined it. "I think about it often, you know. The life we're building, it feels solid, like something real and lasting." He nodded, his eyes filled with the same vision, a warmth that reached deep into her heart. "I see it too," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking the dream aloud might make it even more real. "A place that's ours, a place where we can truly be ourselves, where we can raise a family with the values we hold close. It's all I've ever wanted." They paused at the edge of a small park, the faint scent of lavender from a nearby garden filling the air. The quiet, open space reminded them of the boundless potential that lay before them. The open paths, the freedom to choose where they would go, and the promise of everything they had yet to create together. The woman felt her heart swell with gratitude for this man beside her, who had become her partner, not just in love, but in every step of their journey. He was her confidant, her supporter, the one person who truly saw her in a way no one else ever had. A light breeze brushed against her face, carrying with it a feeling of renewal, of possibilities waiting to unfold. She closed her eyes, breathing it in, letting the moment settle deep within her, like a quiet promise she was making to herself, to keep moving forward with the same strength, the same grace, and the same love that had carried her this far. Her husband watched her, a soft smile on his face as he observed the peaceful expression that had come over her. In her calm presence, He felt his own heart fill with a kind of contentment he hadn't known was possible. There was a beauty in their journey, in the way they had grown together, the way they had each learned to hold space for the other's dreams, fears, and triumphs. She had become not just his partner, but his closest friend, the person who made him feel more grounded, more whole. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a small, tender gesture that spoke of his affection, his admiration, his quiet pride in the person she was. "Whatever the future holds," he murmured, his voice filled with conviction, "I want you to know that I'm here. I'll be here through every step, every dream, every challenge. You and me, we'll build this life together, and it'll be exactly what we imagine it to be." She opened her eyes, looking up at him, her expression soft yet resolute. "I know," she replied, her voice steady, her heart full. "And that's all I need. Knowing that we're in this together, that we're choosing this path side by side, it makes everything feel possible." They stood there in the soft glow of the street lamp, wrapped in the quiet certainty of their love, feeling as though the world had paused just for them, granting them this precious moment to simply be. It was a silence filled not with words, but with understanding, a language they both spoke fluently. They didn't need to say anything more. They could feel it in the gentle hold of their hands, the steady beat of their hearts, the shared rhythm of their breaths. And so, with a final, lingering glance, they resumed their walk, the future stretching out before them like an open road, illuminated by their dreams and the unbreakable bond they had forged together. The night sky, vast and endless above them, felt like a reflection of everything they hoped to build, a life marked by love, resilience, and the quiet strength of two souls who had found in each other a home that no place, no person, no circumstance could ever diminish. As they reached the last stretch of their walk home, the gentle glow of their porch light came into view, casting a warm and welcoming glow over the path that led to their front door. The sight of it brought a sense of comfort, the quiet promise of rest and refuge awaiting them within the walls they had filled with love and laughter. The evening had transformed into night, the stars now clear and bright above, blanketing the city in a peaceful stillness. The woman's steps slowed as they approached the house. She glanced up at her husband, a soft smile playing on her lips, as she took in the familiarity of this scene. The two of them, returning together after a long day, finding solace in each other's presence. It struck her how something so simple could hold so much meaning, how the quiet routine of coming home together had become a cherished ritual, a touchstone in their shared life. This homecoming was more than just an arrival. It was a return to each other, a grounding reminder of the life they were building day by day. He noticed her pause and turned to her, sensing the quiet emotion in her gaze. Without a word, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. They stood there for a moment, under the soft light, neither of them rushing to end the night. It felt as though they were savoring this final stretch of their journey, allowing the calm of the evening to settle deeply within them before crossing the threshold into their home. She leaned into him, letting her head rest on his shoulder, and closed her eyes, soaking in the warmth and strength he offered. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the street, and she could hear the faint chirping of crickets, the world around them settling into its own version of peace. Here, in this shared silence, she felt completely safe, protected not only by the walls of their home, but by the quiet strength of the man beside her. After a few moments, he gently kissed the top of her head, his voice soft as he spoke. "Ready to go in?" he asked, his tone carrying both warmth and a hint of playfulness, as if he knew they could linger here forever, lost in each other's presence. She looked up at him, a tender smile lighting up her face. "Yes," she replied, her voice a quiet affirmation, filled with contentment. "Let's go home." Her words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air, capturing the sense of belonging that wrapped around them both. Hand in hand, they walked up the small path leading to their door, their steps unhurried, savoring the final moments of the night. When they reached the door, he unlocked it, pushing it open to reveal the familiar warmth of their home. The soft lighting inside cast a golden glow over the entryway, and as they stepped in, They were enveloped in a sense of peace that felt like a balm to the day's earlier challenges. She slipped off her shoes and hung up her coat, taking in the comforting surroundings. Their home was filled with small tokens of their life together. Photographs of shared memories on the walls, books they had read side by side, small souvenirs collected from their travels. Each item held a story, a reminder of the journey they had been on together, and each was a testament to the life they had chosen to build. Her husband moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle with water to make tea, a quiet ritual they shared at the end of most evenings. She followed, watching him as he moved with practiced ease, his every action filled with a gentle care that she never took for granted. There was a comfort in this routine, in the familiarity of each step they took, both together and individually, all in sync without the need for words. As the water began to boil, he poured it into 2 cups, handing one to her as they settled onto the sofa. She cupped the warm mug in her hands, breathing in the soothing scent of the tea, letting the warmth seep into her skin. They sipped in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet fully present with each other. The quiet between them was filled with understanding, a reminder that love wasn't always loud or grandiose. Sometimes love was in the simple shared moments, the comforting routines, and the easy silences that spoke volumes without a single word. Tonight, as they sat side by side, they felt the fullness of that love, the depth of a bond that had been strengthened by every challenge, every shared dream, every small act of kindness. Finally, he turned to her, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "No matter what happens out there," he said, gesturing gently towards the world beyond their walls, "we'll always have this." He looked around their home, then back at her, his gaze unwavering. "We'll always have each other." She reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, her heart swelling with gratitude. "And that's more than enough." They finished their tea, the night growing deeper and quieter around them. As they prepared for bed, they moved in the familiar rhythm of their routine, each action carrying the comfort of years spent together. And as they lay side by side, the weight of the day slowly lifting, they drifted into a peaceful sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it hand in hand, bound by a love that was steady, enduring, and endlessly reassuring. In the stillness of the night, their home held them close, a refuge built on respect, trust, and unwavering commitment. It was a simple life, perhaps, but it was theirs, a life made beautiful by the quiet, enduring strength they had cultivated together, a love that would continue to guide them, one step at a time, through every dawn and every dusk, for as long as they walked this path side by side. The morning light crept gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow across their bedroom. The new day arrived with a quiet promise, bringing with it the kind of peace that only comes after a night of restful sleep and shared reassurance. The woman stirred first, her eyes slowly adjusting to the light as she felt the warmth of her husband beside her. She stayed there for a moment, simply watching him, taking in the calm expression on his face, the peaceful rise and fall of his breath. She felt a swell of gratitude as she looked at him, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had weathered together and the strength they had found in each other. It struck her how much joy there was in these small, unremarkable moments. The quiet mornings, the gentle light, the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Here, in this simple everyday scene, was a love story more profound than any grand gesture, woven into the fabric of their shared life. As she slowly got up, careful not to disturb him, she made her way to the kitchen, savoring the quiet of the morning. She moved around the space with ease, gathering ingredients for breakfast, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and eggs sizzling filling the air. The aroma drifted through the house, a comforting scent that held the promise of a new day. A few minutes later, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw her husband standing in the doorway, a sleepy smile on his face, his eyes still a bit hazy with sleep. He looked at her with a warmth that needed no words, a look that held all the tenderness of their years together. He walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, as he breathed in the scent of breakfast, the scent of home. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still touched with the softness of sleep. "Good morning," she replied, leaning into his embrace, letting herself enjoy the warmth of his arms around her. They stood like that for a moment, letting the peacefulness of the morning settle over them, the comfort of each other's presence grounding them for whatever the day would bring. Eventually, they settled down at the table, sharing a quiet breakfast as sunlight filtered in through the window, illuminating their familiar kitchen with a golden glow. They ate in comfortable silence, each savoring the calmness of the moment. It was these simple, everyday rituals that anchored them, reminding them of the life they were building, one small moment at a time. As they finished their meal, her husband set down his coffee cup, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He reached for her hand, holding it gently as he looked at her, his eyes reflecting a quiet determination. "I was thinking about yesterday," he began, his voice steady, but filled with a resolve that caught her attention. "About everything we've talked about, everything we want for the future." She nodded, listening intently, feeling her own heartbeat quicken in response to the intensity in his gaze. "I don't want to wait to start building that future," he continued, his tone soft yet unwavering. "Let's take the next step. Let's make this life we've dreamed of more than just words and plans. I want us to start putting down roots, creating something lasting that we can build on together." His words filled her with a surge of emotion, a blend of excitement, hope, and a deep, abiding love. She felt her own dreams come alive within her, each one illuminated by the sincerity in his voice. She had known, for so long, that they were building towards something special, but hearing him speak it out loud with such conviction made it feel more real than ever. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with certainty. "Let's do it. Let's start now." They shared a smile, a look that held all the unspoken promises they had made to each other, and the certainty that they would fulfill each one together. In that moment, their future felt tangible, close enough to touch, a home filled with love, a life marked by shared values and quiet strength, a legacy they would pass on to those who would come after them. The rest of the morning passed with an undercurrent of excitement, a quiet energy that lingered as they moved through their routines. They spoke of dreams that had once felt distant, but now seemed just within reach, about the home they would create, the family they envisioned, the life they would live in pursuit of the values they held close. Every word, every look, every touch felt like the beginning of something new, a first step towards the life they had long imagined. As the day unfolded, they found themselves moving through it with a renewed sense of purpose. The world around them felt brighter, each moment filled with a profound sense of possibility. And in the quiet certainty of their commitment, they knew they were ready. Ready to begin this next chapter, to build the life they had dreamed of, to create a world rooted in love, respect, and an unbreakable bond that would carry them through every dawn and dusk, side by side, for all the days to come. Later that afternoon, the couple decided to take a drive to the outskirts of the city. The day was crisp and clear, the sky stretching wide and endless above them, tinted a soft blue that promised a beautiful sunset. The excitement of their morning conversation lingered in the air between them, filling each glance, each smile, with a shared anticipation for the future. They didn't speak much as they drove, letting the silence be filled with the quiet hum of the car and the winding road ahead. As they left the busy streets behind, the landscape began to shift. City blocks and tall buildings gave way to rolling fields, clusters of trees, and quiet stretches of land, dotted occasionally with charming houses set back from the road. They passed by farms, open meadows, and stretches of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Each view felt like a new possibility, a glimpse into the life they had begun to envision for themselves. Eventually, they came upon a scenic overlook, a peaceful spot, with a breathtaking view of the valley below. They parked and got out, the cool air brushing against their faces as they took in the view. From this vantage point, the world seemed to open up before them, vast and full of promise. The valley stretched wide, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, with winding rivers and pockets of forest, painting a picturesque landscape below. They walked a little way from the car, finding a quiet spot near the edge of the overlook, where they could sit and simply be in the moment together. As they settled down, the woman took a deep breath, letting the fresh, earthy scent of the open fields fill her senses. She felt a deep, calm happiness settle within her, as if the world itself were affirming the dreams they had shared that morning. Her husband reached for her hand, holding it firmly as they gazed out at the valley, the landscape stretching as far as their eyes could see. He turned to her, a thoughtful expression softening his features. "Can you see it?" he asked, his voice carrying a quiet excitement. "The home we've talked about, the life we want to build. It feels like it's right there, just waiting for us." She nodded, feeling the vision come alive in her mind. She could see it clearly, a home surrounded by nature, a place where peace and warmth would fill every corner. She imagined the two of them in that space, sharing mornings like this one, watching sunsets from their own porch, and filling their days with the small joys they both cherished. It was a life that felt both simple and profound, rooted in love and intention, a life that they could call truly theirs. They spoke in low, reverent voices, sharing details of the future they envisioned. The garden she would tend, where flowers would bloom and vegetables would grow under the sun. The studio he would set up, a space to work on his projects, filled with the tools and mementos of his craft. They imagined family gatherings, the laughter of friends echoing through the house, and quiet evenings spent by the fire, their hearts content and at peace. The woman rested her head on his shoulder, letting herself be wrapped in the warmth of their shared dream. She felt as though they were standing on the edge of something monumental, the beginning of a chapter that would define the rest of their lives. Every detail, every hope, felt closer now, more attainable than ever before. It was as if this moment, this view, this peaceful overlook, had given them a glimpse of the life that awaited them, a life they had both longed for and were now ready to create. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows and painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, they both fell silent, letting the beauty of the landscape mirror the fullness of their hearts. They knew that the road ahead would require patience, that there would be hurdles to overcome and challenges to face. But they felt ready, more ready than they had ever been. They felt grounded, secure in the strength of their bond, and in the quiet power of their commitment to one another. The husband gently lifted her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, his eyes filled with a love that went beyond words. "This is where it starts," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. "Our future begins here, with everything we are and everything we're ready to become." The woman felt a tear slip down her cheek, not out of sadness, but out of a profound, overwhelming joy. She turned to him, her voice steady, but her eyes shining with emotion. "I'm ready," she whispered, her words an echo of his promise. "I'm ready for all of it, with you." They stayed there a little longer, holding each other close as the sun continued its descent, the sky deepening into hues of pink and violet. Eventually, as the first stars began to appear, they made their way back to the car, hands clasped, hearts aligned, ready to step forward into the life they had imagined together. As they drove back, the world felt different somehow, infused with a sense of purpose and quiet excitement. They had seen a glimpse of their future, felt its presence in the open sky and the rolling valley, and they knew, deep within their souls, that they would make it real. Together they would build the life they dreamed of, a life rooted in love, respect, and the enduring strength of a bond that had weathered every storm and would continue to grow, one moment, one step, one dream at a time.